So let's read up a little about how access to climate finance actually works out in reality. Everybody is worried about climate change. Climate scientists keep shouting at the top of their voice about what all is going wrong and how much worse it will get. But what are the practical aspects? Whether it's a Greta Thunberg or it's some climate scientist with his little agenda of research, then that gets expanded to claiming anyway, let's not go into polemics. So this box is about unlocking access to climate finance for Pacific Island countries. Pacific Island countries, or PICs, which are globally among the most exposed to climate hazards, have an urgent need to invest in climate adaptation. So the Pacific plays out in terms of large swings in sea level, even on El Nino timescales. Typhoons, sea level rise is happening very strongly in the west-northwest as well, and so on. And they are generally developing countries which often even sell out their fishing rights to rich countries because they may be very expensive tuna. And once international players come in, like Spain, Japan, China, US, France, they will take over the waters, and then you are just sitting and watching what's happening. IMF estimates that PICs need almost $1 billion every year over the next 10 years, or about 6.5% to 9% of the GDP on average, to upgrade and retrofit public sector infrastructure and coastal protection systems. Island states obviously have to worry about a lot about coastal protection systems, and there are many details. As sea level rises and your land shrinks, does your exclusive economic zone also shrink? This is a legal question. So you started with some land area, let's say a century ago, and sea level rise is eating it up. Then where does your exclusive economic zone fall? However, access to climate finance has been disappointing so far, and Pacific Island countries face many challenges. Not surprising, and yet important to read some details. These critical investment needs notwithstanding, PICs generally have limited fiscal space, low administrative capacity, and underdeveloped private sectors. Very hard to get outside investors to come into the island far away, produce something. Lack of resources, maybe lack of labor force, etc., plus transportation costs and suitability of the place itself, governance, tax incentives, everything can play into it. Okay. As such, they are typically constrained to rely on bilateral partners or grant-based instruments from multilaterals and major climate funds. A lot of tourism investment may happen in terms of hotel chains coming in if they see it as a way to make money, but they don't necessarily bring climate funding. Thus far, PICs have faced significant challenges in getting accredited for direct access from facilities such as the GCF, Global Climate Fund, due to low capacity in public financial management. This is catch-22. You don't have good public financial management, so you don't get funding, and then you don't get funding, so you are not adapting well to climate change, and then you get hammered and again get worse in public financial management. Unfortunately, the speed at which sufficient PFM capacity for direct access could be developed in PICs is inconsistent with the speed at which these countries need to adapt to climate. Unfortunately, excuse me. Yeah, unfortunately I'm coughing because in the monsoon all these cotton clothes get the kind of a musty smell, and I tried to dry them out before, but there is not much sun, so you have to get that Febreze spray or something, and I have a knock on the door from the cleaning people. So let me try to finish this up. So thus far, PICs have faced significant challenges in getting accredited because of poor financial management. Unfortunately, they are not keeping up with the need for climate adaptation. Looking at the figure, green climate fund financing versus estimated annual adaptation needs for Pacific Island funding, it's in millions of US dollars, so a billion up here. Estimated annual financing need is about 800 million. GCF approved is only half of that at about 400 million, and so far GCF dispersed is even half of that over lifetime, and that's only about 200 million. So various excuses used, but access is not good. 2.2, exposure to climate change and approved climate adaptation funding, share of GDP. So this is Tuvalu is not shown here, as it is an outlier in terms of amount of approved climate adaptation funding as percent of GDP at over 200%. You can go up and read these reports to see why Tuvalu did so well. But you can see how the increase in here in terms of the share of GDP and exposure to climate change. So as exposure to climate change increases, obviously the share of GDP needed for adaptation goes up, and Kiribati is way up here with very high exposure and very high fraction of the GDP. If 65% of GDP is needed for climate adaptation, obviously that's not practical in any sense, no matter how rich you are. And Fiji is here doing better, but the Papua New Guinea has higher exposure but a smaller requirement in terms of funding. Solomon Islands, Micronesia, Nauru, Marshall Islands, and so on and so forth. So it gives you a sense. Indirect access to GCF through international accredited entities such as the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, or the UN Development Program has been more successful for PICs with faster approvals and larger projects. However, even with the attempts to streamline requirements, the total amount approved by GCF for all PICS projects since 2015 has only been about half of the estimated annual adaptation needs for the region. To meet the challenge of addressing climate adaptation needs, PICS, climate funds, and the IMF could work better together. So IMF could further integrate analysis of climate issues into macroeconomic surveillance and risk projections it does, and continue to provide capacity development support to countries to build stronger PFM and public investment management practices. Okay, so I'll leave this here relatively short because I have to go allow the cleaning people to come in. So we'll continue in the next podcast on integrating adaptation into macro fiscal frameworks. Okay, see you in the next podcast.